My boss humiliated me during a luxury retreat. She's used to scrubbing floors. Let her clean the pool area. He tossed me a mop in front of everyone. They laughed. He didn't know the guest list had just changed. I vanished that night. And returned in a helicopter. Silence fell. The silver Mercedes pulled away from the circular driveway, leaving me standing alone with my battered duffel bag and the weight of a promise I'd made to a woman who could no longer hold me accountable. My scuffed white sneakers, the same ones I'd worn through college, felt foreign against the polished marble steps of Serenity Haven. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to become invisible in the very place my mother had built from her dreams. The receptionist's manicured nails clicked against her keyboard without pause when I approached. Her nameplate read Brittany in gold letters, and her expression suggested I was interrupting something far more important than my arrival. "You the new girl?" she asked, eyes still glued to her screen. "Clock in, grab a uniform, don't be late. Locker room's down the hall, third door on your right. Orientation starts in 20 minutes. I nodded, absorbing every detail. The way she didn't offer her name. How her voice carried the practiced indifference of someone who'd delivered this speech countless times. The subtle way she positioned her body to create distance. I wasn't a person to her. I was just another replaceable pair of hands. "Thank you," I said softly, shouldering my bag. She didn't acknowledge the gratitude. "Before we continue, if you believe everyone deserves workplace dignity regardless of their role, please subscribe. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds." The employee corridor felt like stepping into a different world. Gone were the warm earth tones and soft lighting of the guest areas. Here fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on beige walls. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, each step taking me further from the life I'd known and deeper into the reality my mother had wanted me to understand. From day one, I became a student of human behavior. During my first kitchen shift, I watched the head chef, Marcus, tear into a teenage prep cook who diced onions slightly too large. "We're not feeding pigs here," he screamed, his face flushed red. "Do it again, and this time use your brain." The kid's hands shook as he started over, and I saw something die behind his eyes, that spark of eagerness every new employee brings on their first day. But it was Scott Morrison, the operations head, who truly commanded attention. He moved through the halls like royalty inspecting his kingdom, his pressed khakis and polo shirt marking him as management even without his badge. "Remember, people," he'd announced during staff meetings, "you're all dispensable. There's a line of applicants waiting to take your place." He'd pause, letting the threat settle like dust. "Excellence isn't optional here. It's survival." The maintenance staff occupied an even lower rung on this invisible ladder. Jordan Martinez worked quietly, efficiently, his tool belt jangling softly as he moved through the shadows of early morning and late evening. Most people looked right through him as if he were part of the furniture. But I noticed how he held doors for the elderly housekeepers, how he always had a spare light bulb or a working pen when someone needed one. There was kindness in his silence, dignity in his invisibility. On my third day, while changing out of my uniform, I heard soft crying from the restroom stall. The sound was muffled, desperate, someone trying hard not to be heard. I recognized the voice. Emma, barely 19, with eager eyes and hands that worked twice as fast as anyone else's. She'd been assigned to the guest suites, the most scrutinized position in housekeeping. I didn't knock. Didn't ask questions. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the granola bar I'd saved from lunch. I slid it under the stall door and waited. The crying stopped. A trembling hand reached down and took the offering. "Thank you," came a whispered voice. I squeezed her shoulder gently through the door and left without a word. Sometimes kindness speaks louder than conversation. The break room became my observatory. 20 minutes of unpaid time where masks slipped and real personalities emerged. Most tables buzzed with gossip or complaints, but one sat perpetually empty except for a single occupant. Gloria Santos had worked at Serenity Haven for 8 years, her silver hair always neat despite the physical demands of her job. She ate alone, read paperback novels with worn covers, and minded her own business with the wisdom of someone who'd learned when to speak and when to listen. One particularly exhausting afternoon, after scrubbing guest bathroom tiles until my knees ached, I collapsed into the chair across from her. She looked up from her apple slices and romance novel, studied my face for a moment, then patted the seat beside her. "I don't talk much either," she said, her voice carrying the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. "But that doesn't mean we can't share the quiet." From that day forward we became companions in silence. She'd offer half her apple, I'd share my crackers. No life stories, no complaints about management, no gossip about coworkers. Just two women finding peace in each other's presence during the brief respite between shifts. My notebook became my constant companion. A small black journal where I recorded observations that might seem meaningless to others but painted a complete picture for me. Staff schedules, management habits, guest complaint patterns, maintenance issues that went unreported. During my lunch breaks, I'd sketch the layout of different floors, noting blind spots in security coverage and areas where employees felt safe to speak freely. It was during one of these sketching sessions that Jordan found me. I'd chosen a quiet corner near the loading dock, my pen moving quickly across the page as I mapped out the service corridors. "Planning an escape?" he asked, his tone light but curious. There was no judgment in his voice, just genuine interest. I looked up at him, really looked. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. "More like understanding the layout," I replied truthfully. "I learn better when I can see how everything connects." He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "This place has more hidden passages than most people realize. Built that way on purpose." He paused, then added quietly, "The woman who designed it understood that sometimes people need escape routes." My pen stopped moving. "The original owner?" "Yeah. Elena Hartley. She died a few years back, but everyone who worked for her still talks about how different things were then." His voice carried genuine respect. "She knew everyone's name, asked about their families. Made this place feel like family." I resumed sketching, but my hand trembled slightly. "What happened to her family?" "Has a daughter somewhere, I think. But she never comes around. Probably too busy with her fancy life to care about this place." He shrugged. "Can't say I blame her. Money changes people." If only he knew how wrong he was about that daughter. But my silence had become my greatest asset, and I wasn't about to abandon it now. Instead, I simply smiled and returned to my drawing, adding one more note to the growing collection of truths I was gathering about my mother's legacy, and the people who were either destroying it or desperately trying to preserve what remained of her vision. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, marked with red exclamation points and Scott's signature aggressive tone. "VitaTech Industries full facility booking. Zero tolerance for mistakes. Smile wider, speak less, be invisible." The tech company's logo gleamed from the header. A sleek, modern design that promised innovation and disruption. What they disrupted, I would soon discover, was any remaining shred of dignity I thought I could maintain. The preparation was military-grade intense. Extra housekeeping shifts, kitchen staff working double time, and groundskeepers trimming every blade of grass to perfection. Scott prowled the corridors like a general before battle, his clipboard clutched tight, barking orders with unprecedented fervor. "These people pay more in a weekend than most of you make in 6 months, he announced during the emergency staff meeting. "Act accordingly." I drew the short straw, pool and patio duty under the merciless July sun. While other staff retreated to air-conditioned interiors between tasks, I spent my days scrubbing pool tiles, arranging lounge chairs in precise geometric patterns, and polishing glass surfaces that reflected the blazing heat back into my face. My uniform, already faded from countless washes, grew darker with sweat stains that no amount of laundering could eliminate. The VitaTech executives arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, their designer luggage handled by bellhops while they swept into the lobby wearing expensive casual wear, the kind of calculated informality that costs more than most people's monthly rent. I watched from behind the pool house, noting how they moved with the confidence of people who'd never questioned their right to occupy space. By the second day, the heat had become unbearable. The pool deck radiated warmth even through my rubber-soled shoes, and the metal handles of my cleaning equipment burned my palms. I found myself taking frequent breaks in the shade, pressing cold water bottles against my wrists to cool my overheated blood. None of the guests seemed to notice the temperature. They lounged comfortably under market umbrellas, their drinks perpetually refreshed by attentive servers. The wine mixer was scheduled for Friday evening, the crown jewel of their retreat package. String lights twinkled overhead, casting romantic shadows across the patio where I'd spent the week scrubbing. A jazz quartet played softly while servers circulated with champagne flutes and artisanal canapes. I was assigned to maintain the perimeter, emptying ashtrays and collecting abandoned glasses with the ghostly efficiency of good help. Scott appeared at my elbow as I bent to retrieve a discarded napkin. His cologne was overpowering in the evening heat, a cloying sweetness that made my stomach turn. "Make sure you stay busy," he hissed, his voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear. "These people don't want to see you standing around." I nodded, continuing my circuit. The conversations around me buzzed with industry jargon and corporate gossip. Acquisitions, market disruptions, personnel changes discussed with the casual cruelty of people who viewed human resources as exactly that, resources to be optimized or discarded. One executive laughed loudly about cleaning house in his engineering department, the metaphor hitting closer to home than he could have imagined. The moment arrived without warning. I was refilling the champagne bucket with ice when Scott's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade. "Perfect timing," he announced, his tone jovial but carrying an edge that made several conversations pause. "She's used to mops. Let her clean the pool drain too." The mop appeared in my peripheral vision before I could process what was happening. Scott's throw was deliberate, theatrical, a performance designed for maximum humiliation. The wooden handle struck the edge of the champagne bucket with a metallic clang, sending ice cubes scattering across the patio stones. Champagne splashed onto my apron, the bubbles catching the string lights like liquid diamonds. The silence that followed felt infinite. I could hear my own heartbeat, the distant jazz quartet, the gentle lap of pool water against tiles. Then came the laughter, not the warm, inclusive laughter of shared joy, but something sharp and predatory. It started with one person, then rippled outward like a toxic wave. Phones appeared in hands, cameras pointed in my direction as if I were part of the evening's entertainment. My body moved on autopilot. I bent down, retrieved the mop, and straightened slowly. My hands shook, not with fear but with a rage so pure it threatened to consume me from the inside. Every fiber of my being screamed to unleash years of business school training, to reveal exactly who they were laughing at, to watch their faces crumble as they realized their mistake. Instead, I turned and walked away. Each step felt like lifting concrete blocks, but I kept my spine straight and my chin level. The laughter followed me across the patio, through the pool gate, past the carefully manicured gardens my mother had designed. It echoed in my ears even after I'd reached the safety of the service corridor. From the kitchen window I caught sight of Gloria. She stood at the industrial sink, her hands motionless in the soapy water, watching the scene unfold with an expression I'd never seen before. Her gentle features had hardened into something resembling granite, and her eyes held a fury that made my own anger seem pale by comparison. She saw me looking and gave the slightest nod, not sympathy but recognition. She understood exactly what had just happened. But one woman in that crowd hadn't laughed. Nina Foster sat at a corner table, her wine glass untouched, her face a mask of professional composure that barely concealed her disgust. I'd noticed her earlier in the week. She asked servers their names, said please and thank you, and left her own towels folded neatly when she left the pool area. An anomaly in a group that treated service staff like decorative objects. Later, as I methodically wiped down lounge chairs in the fading light, she approached. Her footsteps were measured, deliberate, giving me time to compose myself. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice carrying genuine respect. When I looked up, she pressed a business card into my palm with practiced discretion. "If you ever need a witness, or a lawyer," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine with unmistakable sincerity. The card was elegant, expensive. Nina Foster, Employment Law, with a prestigious firm's letterhead. I slipped it into my apron pocket without a word, but she saw the gratitude in my eyes before turning away. That night, I folded towels for the last time in the laundry room that had become my second home. My hands moved automatically through the familiar motions while my mind processed the evening's events. I pulled out a piece of hotel stationery and wrote carefully, "Gloria, thank you for seeing me when others looked through me. Your kindness meant everything. I changed out of my uniform slowly, savoring the symbolic weight of removing each piece. The name tag went into the trash. The apron followed. I pulled on my own clothes, jeans and a simple t-shirt that felt like armor after days in that polyester prison. The rear service gate creaked as I pushed it open, stepping into the warm night air. Behind me, the retreat glowed with golden light, laughter still drifting from the patio where my humiliation had become their entertainment. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. Some exits don't require explanations, they speak for themselves. The black SUV's headlights cut through the darkness as I approached the main road, my footsteps echoing against the asphalt. Davis stepped out of the driver's seat, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of discretion. He didn't ask questions, didn't comment on my disheveled appearance or the fact that I was leaving through the service entrance at nearly midnight. "Mr. Lincoln's expecting you," he said simply, opening the rear door with practiced efficiency. The leather seats felt foreign after weeks of plastic break room chairs and metal lockers. As we pulled away from Serenity Haven, I watched the golden lights shrink in the side mirror until they disappeared entirely behind a curtain of oak trees. The 40-minute drive passed in complete silence. No radio, no small talk, just the steady hum of tires against pavement and my own thoughts churning like storm clouds. Davis understood the weight of moments like these. Transitions that required space to breathe, to process, to prepare for what came next. His eyes met mine once in the rearview mirror, a brief acknowledgement that conveyed more understanding than words ever could. The Lincoln estate sat nestled in rolling hills, its Victorian architecture softened by climbing ivy and wraparound porches that spoke of Sunday afternoons and sweet tea. Warm light spilled from the windows and I could see Dad's silhouette pacing in his study, a habit he'd maintained since I was a child, walking the perimeter of his thoughts until they settled into clarity. He met me at the front door before I could knock, a steaming mug of coffee already in his hands. Richard Lincoln had been my mother's attorney, business partner, and closest friend for over 20 years. When she died, he'd become something more, the keeper of her secrets, the executor of her impossible dreams, and my reluctant guardian through this year-long odyssey of discovery. "You could have left after month 2, he said, handing me the coffee. His voice carried the weight of someone who'd watched me endure far more than any daughter should have to bear in the name of honoring her mother's wishes. The Tennessee kitchen incident was enough to prove the point. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep through my palms. "Mom would have stayed the year," I replied, settling into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. "She would have seen it through to the end no matter how difficult it became." Dad, I'd called him that since I was 12, leaned back in his chair and studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd negotiated million-dollar deals by reading subtle expressions. "Tell me about tonight," he said quietly. I recounted the evening's events with clinical precision, watching his jaw tighten with each detail. When I reached the part about the mop hitting the champagne bucket, his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. By the time I finished, the grandfather clock in the corner had chimed twice, marking the passage of time we could never reclaim. "Elena built Serenity Haven as a sanctuary," he said finally, his voice thick with memory. "After her cancer diagnosis, after months of treatments that stripped away everything except her determination to survive, she wanted to create something beautiful. Something healing." He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at gardens that mirrored the ones my mother had designed at the retreat. It wasn't always about corporate packages and executive bonuses. She envisioned a place where people could find peace regardless of their bank account. The original vision lived in photo albums he pulled from his filing cabinet. Images of families recovering from tragedy, support groups for cancer survivors, art therapy sessions for children with disabilities. My mother had poured her heart into every detail, from the meditation gardens to the wheelchair-accessible paths that wound through native wildflower meadows. Her will was unconventional, Dad continued, returning to his desk with a leather portfolio I'd seen countless times over the past year. "She could have simply left you the controlling stake in the company. Instead, she insisted you earn it by walking in the shoes of every person who would ever work for you." He opened the portfolio, revealing pages of handwritten notes in my mother's careful script. 1 year. Every entry-level position. No exceptions. I traced my finger along her words, feeling the indent of her pen against the paper. "She wanted me to understand the weight of leadership," I whispered. "She wanted you to understand the weight of humanity," he corrected. Elena knew that power without empathy becomes tyranny. She'd seen too many executives who viewed their employees as disposable assets rather than human beings with families, dreams, and dignity. The journey had taken me across 4 states and through 11 grueling months. Industrial kitchens in Atlanta where I'd learned that burns and cuts were considered occupational hazards rather than safety failures. Laundry facilities in Nashville where the heat reached dangerous levels and nobody complained because they needed the work. Guest services in Asheville where I'd been screamed at by entitled customers who viewed service staff as emotional punching bags. Each position had taught me something different about the machinery of hospitality, how quickly turnover occurred when managers ruled through fear, how small kindnesses could transform someone's entire day, how dignity wasn't a luxury but a fundamental human right that too many employers forgot to provide. Scott Morrison was the final test, I said, pulling out my notebook and sliding it across the desk. Everything I observed, every conversation I overheard, every pattern of abuse I witnessed, it's all documented. Dad flipped through the pages, his expression growing grimmer with each entry. Staff turnover rates that approached 90% annually. Complaints that were filed and mysteriously disappeared. A toxic culture that had transformed my mother's sanctuary into exactly the kind of workplace she'd spent her life trying to reform. "We've seen enough," he said finally, closing the notebook with a decisive snap. His phone buzzed against the desk. A text message that made him smile for the first time all evening. "Your corporate identity has been activated. Stephanie Hartley, Vice President of Operations and Employee Relations. Your business cards arrived this afternoon." I pulled out Nina Foster's card, the elegant lettering catching the lamplight. "I'm ready," I typed into my phone, sending the message that would set everything in motion. The response came within minutes. "I'll be there Monday morning. Time to make this right." My next call went to human resources at our corporate headquarters. The night manager, accustomed to emergency situations, answered on the second ring. "This is Stephanie Hartley. I need complete internal complaint records for Serenity Haven, dating back 3 years. Also staff turnover reports, exit interview transcripts, and any documentation related to Scott Morrison's management practices." My voice surprised me, calm, clear, carrying the authority I'd inherited but never fully claimed until this moment. "How quickly can you compile that information?" "We can have everything ready by Monday morning, Ms. Hartley. Is there anything else you need?" "Yes," I said, glancing at Dad, who nodded encouragingly. "Schedule a full facility audit for Tuesday. And arrange for temporary management coverage. We may need to make some immediate personnel changes." After hanging up, I sat in the familiar silence of Dad's study, surrounded by law books and family photos that included images of my mother from happier times. The woman in those pictures radiated the same quiet strength I'd been trying to channel all year, the same determination to create positive change in a world that often rewarded cruelty over compassion. "She'd be proud of you," Dad said softly, following my gaze to a photo of Mom cutting the ribbon at Serenity Haven's grand opening. "Not because you're about to seek justice, though that matters. She'd be proud because you chose to learn rather than judge, to understand rather than condemn." The truth behind the name, Hartley, carried more weight than I'd ever fully comprehended. It wasn't just about ownership or inheritance. It was about responsibility, legacy, and the courage to transform pain into purpose. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, difficult conversations, and the kind of leadership decisions that would define not just my career, but the kind of person I chose to become. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem possible. I chose my outfit with deliberate care, charcoal slacks that spoke of authority without arrogance, a navy blazer that commanded respect, and the pearl earrings my mother had worn to every important business meeting. The badge felt substantial in my palm. Stephanie Hartley, Field Auditor, Corporate Operations. No more polyester uniforms. No more anonymity. The front doors of Serenity Haven opened with a soft whoosh of air conditioning, and I stepped into the marble lobby where Brittany still sat behind her pristine reception desk. Her manicured fingers paused over her keyboard as I approached, her expression shifting from practiced indifference to curiosity. She didn't recognize me. 3 weeks had transformed more than just my clothing. "Good morning," I said, presenting my badge with the same professional courtesy I'd once craved from her. "Stephanie Hartley, Corporate Operations. I'll need access to the staff briefing room in 15 minutes. Her eyes widened as she processed the name, Hartley, like the plaques throughout the building, like the company letterhead. Of course, Ms. Hartley. Should I notify Mr. Morrison? That won't be necessary, I replied, watching recognition dawn across her features. He'll be informed shortly. The employee corridor felt different now, charged with anticipation rather than resignation. Word traveled fast in places like this. By the time I reached the briefing room, conversations had shifted to hushed whispers and questioning glances. The fluorescent lights that had once felt harsh now illuminated a space about to undergo transformation. Sandra Williams from corporate HR had arrived 30 minutes earlier, her briefcase packed with documentation that would reshape everything. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades cleaning up other people's messes, she reviewed her files one final time as staff members filtered into the room. I watched familiar faces claim their usual seats. Jordan near the back, his tool belt traded for clean khakis and a button-down shirt that made him look younger, more hopeful. Emma, the young cleaner who'd cried in the bathroom stall, chose a middle-row seat, her posture straighter than I'd ever seen it. And there was Gloria, settling into her customary corner chair with the quiet dignity that had drawn me to her weeks ago. When Scott entered, the room's energy shifted perceptibly. He wore his usual uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt, his clipboard clutched like a shield against whatever corporate audit was about to disrupt his carefully constructed kingdom. His eyes swept the room with practiced authority until they landed on me. For a split second, confusion flickered across his features. He'd seen me before, somewhere sometime, but couldn't quite place the context. Then Sandra stood and his attention shifted to the immediate threat of a corporate HR review. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice carrying through the room with calm authority. "We're here today to review ethical conduct standards at Serenity Haven. This facility has a proud history of hospitality excellence, and we want to ensure that extends to how we treat each other as colleagues and team members." Whispers rippled through the assembled staff like wind through tall grass. I saw Marcus, the kitchen manager, shift uncomfortably in his seat. The housekeeping supervisor's face had gone pale. And Gloria, dear Gloria, dropped her pen with a soft clatter that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Her eyes met mine across the room, and I watched understanding bloom across her weathered features. The quiet woman who'd shared apples in silence, who'd offered kindness without expectation of return, was seeing me, really seeing me for the first time. Her hand pressed against her heart as if to steady its sudden racing. Scott's chuckle cut through the tension like a blade. Well, he said, rising from his chair with theatrical confidence. "Now you're playing inspector? What's next, gonna teach us all how to fold towels properly?" The condescension in his voice was palpable, designed to diminish me in front of the very people who'd watched him humiliate others countless times. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a manila folder thick with documentation. "These are formal staff complaints and guest incident reports linked directly to your management practices, Mr. Morrison," I said, extending the folder toward him. 23 documented cases of workplace harassment, hostile behavior toward employees, and conduct violations spanning the past 18 months. His confident smirk faltered as he opened the folder. I watched his face drain of color as he recognized incident report after incident report. Complaints he'd dismissed, grievances he'd buried, testimonies from staff members who'd finally found the courage to speak their truth. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "These people complain about everything. You can't run a business by coddling every—" "Mr. Morrison," Sandra interrupted, her tone carrying the weight of decades in human resources. "Based on these documented violations and witness statements, corporate has approved your immediate suspension pending a full investigation. You'll need to surrender your access cards and any company property." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. Scott's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of desperate panic as the reality of his situation crystallized. He looked around the room, perhaps expecting someone to defend him, to speak up on his behalf. Instead, he found only the faces of people he'd spent months terrorizing, watching him face consequences for the first time. He stormed toward the door, his clipboard clattering to the floor as he shoved past Jordan's chair. "This isn't over," he muttered, though whether to me or the room in general remained unclear. The door slammed behind him with a finality that seemed to release something in the air, tension that had been building for months, fear that had kept good people silent for far too long. No one clapped. No one cheered. The moment was too heavy, too significant for celebration. Instead, there was a collective exhale, as if everyone had been holding their breath for longer than they'd realized. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the retreat's main conference room, facing the VitaTech executives who were scheduled to remain for 2 more days. Nina Foster sat in the front row, her expression unreadable but her presence deeply reassuring. The others arranged themselves in clusters, their expensive casual wear and confident postures marking them as people unaccustomed to being lectured about their behavior. 3 nights ago, I began, my voice steady despite the weight of what I was about to share. I stood in this very building wearing a housekeeping uniform, carrying a mop that had been thrown at my feet for your entertainment. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the group as memories clicked into place. You laughed. You took photos. You treated a human being's dignity as disposable for the sake of a moment's amusement. One woman in the back row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her face flushed with what I hoped was shame. Others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding their phones or the table surface infinitely interesting. But Nina sat with her arms crossed and her face radiating pride, the look of someone who'd chosen correctly when it mattered most. I want to tell you about the real cost of that laughter, I continued, and for the next 20 minutes I shared not just my story, but the stories of every person who'd ever been dismissed, degraded, or dehumanized in the name of someone else's entertainment. The room grew quieter with each word, the weight of collective responsibility settling over them like a heavy blanket. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough to feel permanent. Finally, the VitaTech CEO, a man who'd laughed loudest that night, cleared his throat. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice noticeably subdued, "we owe you and your entire staff a formal apology. This isn't who we want to be as a company." It was a start. Not redemption perhaps, but recognition. And sometimes recognition is where real change begins. The VitaTech executives departed on Wednesday morning, their luggage heavier with the weight of uncomfortable truths. As their black SUVs disappeared down the winding driveway, I found myself standing alone in the employee break room, holding an object that had become far more than cleaning equipment. The mop, the same one Scott had thrown at my feet, rested against the wall where someone had carefully cleaned and positioned it. Jordan appeared in the doorway, a measuring tape in one hand and a curious expression on his face. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the clear display case he'd helped me order from a local craftsman. The glass was pristine, the wooden base crafted from reclaimed oak that matched the retreat's rustic aesthetic. "Absolutely certain," I replied, lifting the mop with reverence rather than resignation. Inside the case it looked transformed, not a tool of humiliation but a symbol of dignity reclaimed. The brass plaque Jordan had engraved read simply, "Respect starts here." As words spread through the building, staff members began filtering into the break room throughout the afternoon. They came quietly, individually, some touching the glass with gentle fingers, others simply standing in contemplative silence. Emma, the young cleaner who'd become my first ally in kindness, traced the letters on the plaque with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The real work began that evening in my temporary office, formerly Scott's domain, now stripped of his aggressive motivational posters and redecorated with plants and comfortable seating. I spread the existing training manuals across my desk, their corporate-speak language and intimidating legal jargon painting a picture of an organization more concerned with protecting itself than supporting its people. Page by page I rewrote everything. Where the old manual stated, "Employees must maintain professional appearance standards at all times," the new version read, "We believe everyone deserves to feel confident and comfortable while representing our team." Instead of "failure to comply will result in disciplinary action," I wrote, "If you need support meeting any of these guidelines, please speak with your supervisor or HR representative." The anonymous reporting system required delicate engineering. Working with an outside consultant recommended by Nina Foster, we installed digital kiosks in private locations throughout the facility, tucked into alcoves near the employee entrance, positioned discreetly in the locker rooms, accessible but not obvious. Staff could report concerns, suggestions, or compliments without fear of retaliation. Dr. Sarah Chin arrived the following Monday, her warm smile and gentle demeanor immediately putting nervous employees at ease. A licensed counselor specializing in workplace trauma, She set up office in what had once been a storage room, transforming it into a sanctuary with soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and the kind of confidentiality that allows healing to begin. "I've worked in hostile environments before," she told me during our initial consultation, "but the culture here feels different already. There's hope in the air. That's not something you can manufacture." The quarterly shadowing program proved to be the most transformative initiative. When I announced that all management personnel would spend one full week every 3 months working alongside entry-level staff, the reactions varied dramatically. Marcus, the kitchen manager, looked genuinely terrified. "You want me to wash dishes?" he asked incredulously. "I want you to understand the people who wash dishes," I corrected. "Their challenges, their insights, their contributions to our success." His first day on dish duty was humbling. By hour 3, his pristine chef's coat was soaked with sweat and steam. By hour 6, he was chatting with the prep cooks about equipment improvements they'd been suggesting for months. By week's end, he'd implemented 3 efficiency changes that cut cleaning time by 30% while improving working conditions. The transformation rippled through every department. Housekeeping supervisors discovered that their staff had brilliant ideas about room turnaround procedures. Front desk managers learned about the physical toll of carrying heavy linens up 3 flights of stairs when the service elevator broke down. Maintenance supervisors realized their team had been jerry-rigging solutions to problems that could be permanently fixed with modest equipment investments. Gloria's metamorphosis was the most remarkable to witness. No longer relegated to solitary lunches, she found herself surrounded by colleagues eager to hear her stories and benefit from her decades of institutional knowledge. When I offered her the position of staff mentor, a newly created role focused on supporting new employees and facilitating communication between departments, her eyes filled with tears. "I never thought anyone saw me as more than just background," she admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've given me back my voice." Jordan's promotion to facilities coordinator came with a 40% salary increase and the authority to implement the safety and efficiency improvements he'd been quietly noting for years. His first official act was installing ergonomic floor mats in the kitchen, dramatically reducing the back strain that had plagued staff for months. Emma's journey from crying in bathroom stalls to housekeeping team lead exemplified the kind of growth that became possible when people felt valued rather than expendable. Her natural empathy and attention to detail, once overlooked by previous management, made her exactly the kind of leader who could inspire rather than intimidate. The halls began echoing with genuine laughter again. Not the nervous chuckles of people walking on eggshells, but the easy camaraderie of colleagues who respected each other. Conversations flowed more freely. Suggestions were offered without fear. Problems were solved collaboratively rather than through intimidation. Scott's departure was handled with professional discretion. No press releases, no dramatic confrontations, just a final paycheck and a mailed letter outlining the terms of his separation. I made a conscious decision never to speak his name again within these walls. He'd caused enough damage. He wouldn't be granted the power to continue haunting the people he'd tormented. "Some people collect grudges," Dr. Chin observed during one of our weekly check-ins. "You're collecting healers." One evening in late August, as golden sunlight streamed through my office windows, I discovered a homemade apple pie on my desk. The crust was perfectly golden, the aroma rich with cinnamon and care. A small sticky note was attached to the pie tin, written in Gloria's careful handwriting. "Your mama would be proud. Not because you fought, but because you healed." I sat alone in that office, tears streaming down my face as I processed the profound truth in those words. My mother hadn't left me this inheritance to seek revenge or prove points. She'd wanted me to understand that real leadership meant creating environments where people could flourish, where dignity was non-negotiable, where kindness was considered a strength rather than a weakness. The pie was delicious, but the message was even sweeter. Change wasn't just possible, it was happening, one conversation, one policy revision, one act of intentional kindness at a time. In transforming Serenity Haven, I was discovering that healing others had somehow healed something broken inside myself as well. As autumn approached, bringing with it the crisp promise of new beginnings, I found myself genuinely excited about the future we were building together. Not just for me, not just for the company, but for every person who would walk through these doors and be treated with the respect and dignity that should be every worker's birthright. The mop in its glass case caught the evening light, No longer a symbol of humiliation but a daily reminder that respect truly does start here. With how we choose to see each other, how we choose to treat each other, and how we choose to build something better from the ruins of what came before. The photograph appeared on Instagram at 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, posted by Alex Chin, our newest marketing intern who'd started just 3 weeks earlier. The image was simple. The glass case containing the mop, morning sunlight streaming through the break room windows, casting prismatic rainbows across the brass plaque. The caption read, "Our new boss used to mop this floor. This is what real leadership looks like. #respect starts here. #Serenity Haven." Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. By afternoon, it had crossed platforms: Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Each share carrying its own commentary about workplace culture, dignity, and authentic leadership. News outlets picked up the story but not in the sensationalized way I'd feared. Instead, journalists focused on the transformation, the healing, the radical idea that treating people with respect could actually improve business outcomes. Good Morning America called on Wednesday. The Today Show followed on Thursday. I declined them all. This wasn't about creating a media spectacle or positioning myself as some kind of corporate savior. The story belonged to Gloria, to Jordan, to Emma, to every person who'd found their voice in a place that had once tried to silence them. Instead, I found myself at my laptop late one evening, the break room quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of the night cleaning crew going about their work with newfound pride. The words flowed onto the screen like water finding its natural course. Learning leadership one floor at a time. The column wasn't meant to be a manifesto, just an honest reflection on what I'd discovered during those 11 months of intentional invisibility. I wrote about the arrogance of assuming leadership could be learned from textbooks and boardrooms alone. About the profound wisdom that exists in every corner of an organization, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. About the difference between managing people and serving them. I submitted it to Harvard Business Review on a whim, expecting either rejection or heavy editing that would sanitize the raw emotion. Instead, they published it exactly as written with a simple author bio. Stephanie Hartley is VP of Operations at Serenity Haven Retreats and believes that the best leaders are made, not born, one authentic interaction at a time. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox flooded with messages from executives sharing their own stories of workplace transformation, from employees describing toxic environments they hoped to change, from business students questioning everything they'd been taught about leadership hierarchy. One message from a hotel housekeeper in Denver brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for showing others that we matter too." But it was the email from Dr. Patricia Williams, Dean of Business at Northwestern University, that sparked the idea that would become my mother's true legacy. "We'd like to invite you to speak to our MBA students," she wrote. "But more than that, we'd like to explore creating a scholarship program based on your mother's philosophy of servant leadership." The Hartley Dignity Grant was born from that conversation, designed not just to provide financial support but to fundamentally reshape how we think about leadership development. Instead of rewarding traditional metrics like GPA or networking skills, the grant required applicants to spend 6 months working in entry-level positions within service industries. Their final essays had to demonstrate not just what they'd learned about business operations, but how the experience had changed their understanding of human dignity in the workplace. The first recipient was chosen unanimously by our selection committee. Emma Rodriguez, the young woman who'd once cried alone in bathroom stalls, had submitted an application that read more like poetry than a traditional scholarship essay. She wrote about the power of small kindnesses, about leadership as healing rather than conquering, about her dream of opening her own hospitality business where every employee would be treated as family. The award ceremony took place in the same break room where her journey had begun, with Gloria presenting the check while Jordan operated the camera and Marcus, transformed by his own quarterly shadowing experience, provided homemade cupcakes that had become his signature contribution to office celebrations. "This isn't just money for school," Emma said, her voice steady now where it had once trembled. "This is proof that pain can become purpose, that the worst moments of our lives can become the foundation for helping others." 3 months later, I found myself standing at my mother's graveside on a crisp October morning, the kind of day she'd always said was perfect for new beginnings. The headstone was simple granite, engraved with her name, dates, and a single line: "She made spaces for healing." Fallen leaves carpeted the ground in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in the distance church bells chimed the hour. I knelt and placed 2 items at the base of the stone. A rolled cleaning rag, not the mop from the display case, but a fresh cloth that symbolized ongoing work rather than past trauma, and a single white gardenia, her favorite flower. The gardenia had been surprisingly difficult to find in October, requiring calls to 3 different florists before I located one willing to special order it. I walked every step, I whispered, my breath visible in the cool air. Just like you wanted me to. Just like you did when you were building something beautiful from something broken. The words felt simultaneously enormous and intimate, a conversation across the veil of mortality that somehow felt as natural as our talks had been when she was alive. A groundskeeper worked quietly in the distance, raking leaves with the methodical care of someone who understood that tending to sacred spaces was itself a form of ministry. He nodded respectfully as our eyes met, one caretaker acknowledging another. Monday morning found me arriving at Serenity Haven before sunrise, not because I had to but because I wanted to. The building felt different in those quiet early hours. Expectant, peaceful, humming with the potential energy of a place where good things were happening. I made coffee in the break room using the commercial machine that had intimidated me during my first week as a cleaner but now felt like an old friend. When Gloria arrived at her usual time, she found me sitting at our familiar table with 2 steaming mugs and a plate of the cinnamon cookies she'd mentioned liking during one of our silent lunches months ago. No cameras captured the moment. No social media posts documented our conversation about her grandchildren, her garden, her plans for the quilting class she was teaching at the community center. You know what I love most about this? She said, gesturing around the break room where other early arrivals were beginning to filter in, their greetings warm and genuine rather than perfunctory. It's not that you changed everything overnight. It's that you proved change was possible at all. Through the windows, I could see Jordan consulting with a landscape architect about expanding the meditation garden, Emma training 2 new housekeeping staff with the patience and encouragement she'd once desperately needed, Marcus laughing with his prep cooks over some shared joke that would have been impossible during the regime of fear that had once governed this place. The mop in its glass case caught the morning light, no longer an artifact of humiliation but a daily reminder that respect truly could start anywhere, with anyone brave enough to model it first. This was exactly where I belonged, not above the work, but within it, part of the ongoing effort to create something worthy of my mother's memory and everyone who would call this place their professional home. Some legacies are built on monuments and headlines. Others are built on quiet moments of dignity, one interaction at a time, until kindness becomes so embedded in the culture that cruelty can no longer take root. This was the legacy that would last. If this story of dignity and transformation had you feeling inspired, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Stephanie placed that mop in the glass case, transforming humiliation into hope. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.